Welcome to Hearts of Scripture, where ancient words come alive, where every story of the Bible touches the heart and awakens the soul. This is the story retold through the eyes of Dante Alighieri, the man who once walked through the depths of the soul and saw the light of heaven within the darkness of humanity. Today, I invite you to walk with me through that journey once more, not to hear another sermon, but to live again the pilgrimage of faith, of doubt, and of rebirth. I do not speak from memory, but as one who has walked, who has fallen, and who has been lifted up. Every word I speak is the ashes of doubt and the fire of grace. This is not only an ancient story, it is the story of every soul still wrestling between light and shadow, between the cry of the heart and the silence of God. Listen not only with your ears, but with your soul. I remember that night clearly. The sky was without stars, and the wind carried the smell of smoke from a city that called itself great. People praised their own creation, building towers that reached the clouds, believing that power could touch the heavens. But I heard a quiet voice within me, like a drop of water falling on burning coal, asking if light could still shine when the heart no longer knew how to kneel. In that darkness, I saw another city, splendid as a mirror, but empty inside. They called it glory, but God called it Sodom. They believed prosperity was a blessing, not knowing that blessing never departs from justice. I heard songs mingled with cries, laughter mixed with sorrow. Prosperity had covered the cracks of the soul. Sin did not come in terrifying form. It came as a gentle breath, as a sweet promise that everything was fine. But under the moonlight, I saw something else, mercy still standing at the threshold, patiently waiting for a whisper of repentance. God never sends fire without first sending a warning. Before judgment, there is always an invitation. Before wrath, there is always a tear. I heard in the wind the echoes of unheard cries, the prayers of the forgotten, and above, God remained silent, not out of indifference, but because he was waiting for a heart that could still be moved. People often think Sodom was destroyed because of sin, but sin was only the surface. Its root was pride that turned hearts to stone, compassion that was forgotten, and indifference exalted as freedom. I understood that judgment does not begin in heaven, but in the moment when man chooses to turn away from light. The fire from the sky is only a reflection of the fire within the soul when the heart closes itself to grace. And I heard that voice whispering, soft yet sharp as a blade. Before you see smoke on the rooftops, look and see where the fire has begun within your heart. Every civilization collapses not because of poverty or war, but because it no longer trembles before God. I knelt among the ashes of a city that burned itself with its own desire. And in that night, I understood one thing: the fire of justice never falls without carrying the light of mercy. Before the heavens open to release wrath, God knocks on every soul with a call to awaken. He still stands there, on the threshold between grace and judgment, waiting for the one still brave enough to return. I tell this so you may know that no flame is ever random, and no warning is ever in vain. That city burned, yet within the smoke there was still light. That light is mercy. I'm still waiting for us before the next fire is lit. Have you ever wondered what makes a city be called by God among all nations? Not to be blessed, but to be judged. I once asked that question as I stood in a barren land where the wind carried dust and the cries of the forgotten. God does not pour out fire suddenly. He walks slowly, like a father, heavy with sorrow, hesitating before disciplining the child. He loves. In my vision, I saw the Lord walking among the oaks of Mamre, where the evening light stretched long upon the ground, and beside him was one called the friend of God, Abraham, whose faith and compassion had become the bridge between heaven and earth. The Lord said, "The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah has reached me. Their sin is very great. He did not speak in anger, but in sorrow. I heard in his voice the grief of one who does not wish to punish, yet cannot remain silent when justice is trampled. He said, I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. Not because he did not know, but because he wanted humanity to understand that his judgment always comes with witness and with mercy. Before the sword of justice is drawn, grace is always offered once more. I saw Abraham bow his head, not out of fear, but out of love. He did not oppose God. He pleaded with him, like a child begging his father to slow down before punishing his brother. Lord, if there are 50 righteous people in the city, will you destroy it? God answered, I will spare the whole city for their sake. Then Abraham lowered the number from 50 to 45, then 40, 30, 20, and 10. Each time he spoke, God replied, I will not destroy it if I find 10 righteous people there. Within those numbers, I saw that his mercy is greater than any human reasoning. Abraham did not argue to change God's mind. He simply touched his heart. I understood that God never delights in punishment. He only acts when the human heart has closed every door to repentance. When Abraham looked up, I saw in his eyes not fragile hope, but understanding that the mercy of God had reached its limit. And I wondered, if he came into this world today, what would he say when seeing cities shining with lights, yet dark in spirit? Would he still find 10 righteous people among the countless who worship wealth and power more than truth? Do the cries of the oppressed still reach our ears? Or have we learned to silence our conscience, to sleep more peacefully through the night? I thought of that as I watched Abraham seeing the Lord off. The wind moved through the fields, and I seemed to hear him whisper, I do not hide from you what I am about to do, for I have called you friend. In this chaotic world, that friendship remains an invitation. God does not only seek the holy, he seeks those who care. He looks for those willing to stand between wrath and the suffering, those who dare to say, please wait, have mercy once more. As I watched the light fade along the horizon, I understood that the silence of God is not absence, but the pause, waiting for man to speak. Abraham did what each of us is called to do, to intercede, to stand in between, to plead for others. God does not need arguments. He needs a heart that knows compassion. I looked toward the horizon where fire was being gathered in the hands of the angels, and I heard his voice like the wind, gentle yet resolute. I have searched, but found none, and I wondered, if he came to our city today, would he find us interceding or only find us silent? In that vision I saw, when God departed from the fields of Mamre, his 2 messengers walked toward the south, where red dust clung to their feet and the sun set behind the walls of Sodom. No one in the city knew that night would be their last, for sin rarely announces itself before it reaches its limit. The 2 messengers walked in the form of men, silent and unarmed, carrying only the light that made darkness retreat each time they passed. When they reached the city gate, there was a man sitting there, his face marked by one who once knew the light but had grown accustomed to the dark. His name was Leth, a man who chose to remain in Sodom, believing he could keep his faith without leaving a fallen place. He rose, bowed, and earnestly invited the 2 guests to his home. In that city, the night was feared, and Leth knew no place was safe once the sun had gone. He prepared a meal, setting bread and water before them, trying to act as if everything were normal as every other night. Yet in his heart, a strange unease stirred. For Sodom, though rich, had lost its soul. People laughed at the righteous. They applauded deceit, and mercy was despised as weakness. When the 2 messengers entered the house and the door was shut, footsteps sounded outside. Before they could lie down, the entire city gathered, young and old, surrounding the door. The knocking grew loud, laughter rising like the mockery of demons. They shouted, demanding the two guests be brought out so that they might know them. Those words were not a greeting, but the blade of violence. I saw in their eyes no trace of humanity, only the fire of desire and the delight of trampling what was holy. Sodom no longer distinguished between man and beast, between what was right and what was convenient. Leth trembled as he stepped out, closing the door behind him. Facing the drunken crowd, he pleaded with them not to do evil, but laughter answered him like crashing waves. They mocked him, called him a judge, and scorned every warning. I understood then that sin not only blinds, it makes the soul hate the light. They did not only want to sin, they wanted to drag holiness down and crush it beneath their feet. While Leth still trembled, a strong hand pulled him back inside. The door slammed shut, and light burst forth. The crowd outside was struck blind. They screamed, groped, searched for the door, but could not find it. Though blind, they still tried to knock, to strike, to break in. For when sin has consumed the soul, man no longer fears punishment. He only fears losing the chance to sin. I saw that image and understood this was not only a night in Sodom, it was the symbol of every generation. When what is sacred is despised, when the cry of justice is drowned by laughter, when desire is called freedom and mercy is deemed weakness, then fire is not far away. The two messengers turned to Leth and said, gather all who belong to you and take them out, for we are about to destroy this place. And as they spoke, the sun set completely, the light in the sky faded. Only torches flickered in the wind, like the last sign of a vanishing chance. I heard in the wind the voice of God, not a roar, but a sigh. I have come and seen and waited, but they would not listen. That was the moment when mercy turned into justice. The fire had not yet fallen, but it was already kindled in the heart of heaven, waiting for the final drop of grace to fall before it began to consume a city that had nothing left to save. In the dim light of dawn, Sodom still slept in its false peace. No one knew that the sun would never rise over the city again. I saw the two messengers standing silently by the door, their faces solemn, as those who carried within them both mercy and judgment. They looked at Leth and said, call your family. All who belong to you, take them out of this place, for it is about to be destroyed. Leth hurried out to find his sons-in-law, the men betrothed to his daughters, his voice trembling as he said, get up, leave this city. The Lord is about to destroy it. But they laughed, thinking he was joking. That laughter was soft as the wind, yet in my ears it sounded like the laughter of souls signing their own sentence. When he returned, his eyes were hollow, filled with helpless sorrow. He knew the warning was no longer believed, and that those he loved would perish not by fate, but by disbelief in what was coming. The two messengers spoke no more. Outside, the wind grew stronger, dust filled the air, and the atmosphere grew heavy, as if creation itself was holding its breath. I saw red light glowing at the horizon, like blood seeping from the wounds of the earth. Leth still stood motionless, his feet heavy as if bound. He did not want to leave, yet dared not stay. Within him raged a battle between memory and faith, between familiarity and the call of God. The messengers looked at him, not with anger, but with sorrow. Then they took his hand, the hand of his wife, and those of his two daughters, and led them out of the city. I heard in the wind a voice saying, by the mercy of the Lord, they are being led out, not because they are worthy, but because his grace still remains. As they walked, the sound of laughter Music and singing echoed behind them, as though the city was blind to its own destruction. I saw doors open, faces peering through curtains, yet no one ran. No one believed. They looked at that family as if they were mad, as though safety was in staying and danger was only an illusion. When they reached the plain, the messengers turned and said, "Oh, flee for your life. Do not stop. Do not look back. Run to the mountains, or you will be swept away." But Leth trembled and looked toward the distant hills standing in the mist. He said, "Please do not make me flee that far. I fear I will not reach in time. Let me stay in that small town nearby. Is it not a little one? Let me live there." And the voice replied, "Very well. I will not destroy that place for your sake. Hurry, for I cannot act until you reach safety." As Leth began to leave, a flash tore across the sky. The sound roared like thunder, but it was not rain. From the heavens, sparks of fire began to fall, wave after wave, like molten streams pouring from the mouth of heaven onto the earth. I felt the ground tremble, heard cries in the distance mixed with crashing walls, flames devouring roofs, and stones bursting in the heat. Sodom and Gomorrah were consumed in a sea of fire, not the fire of men, but the fire of justice. I saw those flames burn not only the walls, but every illusion, every pride, every laugh that once mocked God. And amid that storm of fire, there still echoed one final sound of mercy, a whisper, soft as wind. "I have waited, I have called, I have sent my messengers, but they did not listen. Now their silence has become their answer." When the fire fell, the sky turned into a crimson veil, and the cracking of the earth echoed like the cry of creation itself. From above, I saw what had once been a city now reduced to a heap of smoking ashes. Sodom was not destroyed for a moment of failure, but because sin had become its very breath. I saw pride upon the fallen rooftops, indifference along the scorched streets. None of them believed that justice would come, for they had lived so long under grace that they mistook grace for forgetfulness. They mocked what was holy. They turned faith into a joke. And in the end, their laughter returned as the sound of weeping. When fire touched the earth, I understood that no destruction is random. Every flame that fell was the result of a warning ignored, a cry unheard. And mercy refused. Beneath the ashes, I still saw traces of what once was life. Broken wine jars, nameplates, doors that would never open again. And in the ruins, a voice seemed to echo through time. This is what happens when pride replaces faith. Sodom did not die in sin. It died in complacency. I remembered the words of the Lord spoken through the prophet Ezekiel, that the sin of Sodom was not only corruption, but pride, excess, and indifference toward the poor. They ate their fill and dressed in splendor, yet never bent down to see the hungry at their feet. They prayed, but only to hear their own voices within the temple wall. They believed sin belonged to others, and that was the beginning of their destruction. When mercy is replaced by apathy, justice comes like a wind that no one can stop. I saw stones fall, towers crumble, and I knew that God does not pour out wrath without cause. He simply reclaims what humanity has lost. Destruction is not revenge. It is the consequence of stubbornness. Fire does not only destroy, it purifies. In that blazing light, I saw a truth so clear it hurt. When sin becomes culture, judgment is no longer a warning. It becomes inevitable. In that moment I understood. God does not desire to destroy man. He desires to destroy the sin consuming his soul. But when sin and man become one, Justice must cleanse them both. I saw the flames curl like hands burning away the pride of mankind. Every spark that fell was not merely an ending, but a mirror reflecting humanity's true nature. When the light touched the ground, darkness showed its face. I thought of the cities of today, bright with electricity, yet dim within. When compassion is replaced by calculation, when truth is bent to please the crowd, when justice is sold for power, the fire has already begun to burn, not upon rooftops, but within souls. I heard in the wind the final voice, not of anger, but of sorrow. If they had turned back, I would have forgiven them. But no one stopped, no one repented. Fire falls only when every warning has been buried beneath laughter. And when the smoke finally cleared, I saw one thing still standing among the ashes, the justice of God, both terrifying and beautiful, for it cannot be bought nor delayed forever. Amid the ruins and rising smoke, I saw Leth standing on a small hill, his clothes darkened with ash, his eyes red from the reflection of distant fire. The wind carried the smell of sulphur and the sound of the earth cracking under heat. But in his eyes there was more than fear. There was an emptiness, the hollow silence of one who has lost everything. He had escaped the city, yet his soul remained bound to its gates. I understood that the escape was not only from the fire outside, but from the fire burning within. A man may leave a place, but it is not easy to leave what has lived within him for too long. Leth looked down at his trembling hands, and in that moment I saw the image of all who have compromised with darkness. They believe they can keep their hearts pure while dwelling among sin. But light cannot remain in a house that has chosen darkness as its home. Leth once sat at the city gate, where people gathered to trade, to judge, to speak of power. He was respected, heard, and seen, but he had traded purity for position, and now, as all crumbled away, he saw that what he held had been nothing but dust. I looked upon his face and saw the familiar story of humanity, each thinking they can live close to sin without being stained, that they can walk through Sodom and keep their conscience untouched. But Leth was the proof that compromise is never neutral. It slowly shapes the soul into the very thing it once resisted. I remembered the look in his eyes when the messengers took his hand. Not gratitude, but sorrow. He did not want to stay because of sin. He feared losing the life he knew. The old streets, the familiar faces, the comfort of what he had built. But that is the true nature of bondage. When sin no longer needs chains because the heart has bound itself by attachment. I saw tears fall, not from fear, but from understanding that he had lived his life in a city he should have left long ago. I thought, if he had departed from Sodom while the light still shone, perhaps his family would not have fallen apart. But the human heart only runs when it sees fire, and by then it is often too late. Leth turned to his wife and 2 daughters, their faces pale under the dim morning light, their eyes empty. They were no longer people of faith, only survivors. Behind them, the horizon was thick with smoke, a veil covering all memory. I understood then that being saved does not always mean being at peace. Grace can pull the body out of the fire, but only faith can pull the soul out of the past. And Leth, though he had escaped the city, still carried the scent of Sodom within him. He knelt, gripping the soil as if to bury his memories. But inside, he still heard the call of what was lost. In the wind, I seemed to hear a voice, "You have been pulled out. But unless you part from yourself, you are not truly saved." When the sun rose, casting pale gold light over the ashes, I saw Leth fall to his knees. He was no longer the man of stature he once was, but a soul under judgment. Between earth and heaven, he had only one question left. How do you live when the place you trusted for safety has been burned away? And I knew that question did not belong only to him, but to every soul that has placed its faith in what could never save it. The morning light fell upon Leth's face, yet his eyes still turned toward the rising black smoke. In that moment, I understood that escaping destruction is not the same as being free. He had been pulled out of the city, but not yet pulled out of himself. The shadow of Sodom still clung to his soul like ash upon skin. What he once loved, trusted, and depended on had now become the weight holding him between life and ruin. I saw the messengers look at him, their eyes not stern, only sorrowful. One said, "Hurry, flee to the mountain. Do not stop. Do not look back." But Leth hesitated, his gaze shifting between two worlds. Behind him was the city consumed by fire. Before him, the cold and barren mountains, silent and unknown. He feared the flames, but he also feared loneliness. He had lived too long among voices, lights, and music, so that silence now frightened him. With a trembling voice, he said to the messengers, "Please let me stay in that small town. I do not have the strength to reach the mountains." It was the plea of a soul not yet decisive, a half-belief that wanted to be saved but not changed. I understood that the mercy of God does not only save the resolute, it also saves the weak. But weakness always carries its cost. When the messengers agreed, the fire paused and the wind grew still. But in that stillness, the most terrible thing happened. Leth's wife, walking behind him, slowly turned back. I did not hear a scream, only saw time stand still, her eyes fixed on the burning city, on the rooftops, the memories, everything she could not let go of. In that instant, her body froze, a light surrounded her, and she became a pillar of salt in the desert. I stood silent, gazing upon her form, no longer human, not kite stone, but the monument of regret. One glance was enough to reveal where her heart truly belonged. I understood then that death does not always come from fire. Sometimes it comes from the glance backward. When the heart turns toward what God has condemned, the body may leave the city, but the soul still burns. Leth stood motionless, his hand still holding the air where his wife's hand had been. He did not weep. He simply knelt. There are sorrows too deep for tears to flow. I saw him bow low as the wind rose, carrying ashes across the land, covering the salt figure until it blended with the sand. When he stood again, I realized a person can lose everything in a single moment of hesitation. In his eyes there was no light, only the emptiness of one who has learned the price of indecision. He walked forward heavily, without a word. Behind him, fire still burned and ashes still drifted. Before him lay the long path toward the mountains, the place God had appointed. Each step was a confession. I watched him and thought, perhaps this is how God teaches a soul to be resolute. He does not punish with the whip, but by showing what happens when we look back at what should have been left behind. In the dim light of morning after destruction, Leth's figure faded into the slope of the mountain, silent as a soul burned in quiet sorrow, carrying with him the cry of a past turned to salt. As the light faded from the horizon, Leth and his two daughters had moved far from the plain, where smoke still rose like a pillar between earth and sky. The wind howled through the rocks, sounding like the lament of souls buried beneath the thick ash. On Leth's face there was no longer fear, only silence, heavy as stone. Each step he took was a torn memory, for behind him lay his wife, his home, his entire life now lost. He did not look back, yet his eyes were dim, as if seeing within his mind the things he could not forget. I knew then that the cruelest punishment is not death, but to live with the memory of it. When they reached the small city that rested at the foot of the mountain, The reflection of fire still glowed in the distance, like a wound that would not close. No one in that place asked where they came from, for the smell of sulphur and ash on their clothes had already spoken for them. They were given shelter, but that night no one slept. Leth sat by the doorway, the distant glow of fire casting hard shadows across his face, turning him into something like a statue. His two daughters, young yet aged in their eyes, sat nearby. They said nothing, only looked at their father, then at each other, as if among the three of them, life itself had become an unbroken silence. I felt their isolation, not from the world around them, but from within. They were the last survivors of a world that had been judged. Yet survival is not always mercy. It can also be a burden. For when justice burns away everything familiar, the soul must learn how to live among ruins without losing faith. Leth spoke to no one. Whenever the wind rose, he thought he heard his name whispered from afar, and he knew it was not the wind. Regret clung to him like a shadow that would not let go. He remembered the final morning in Sodom, the look in his wife's eyes as she turned back, the gaze of one who had no time to say goodbye. He knew the price of hesitation was not only loss, but the eternal impossibility of return. I saw him walk outside, standing upon the slope of the mountain, looking down toward the valley, still glowing faintly. The ground there was split open, steam rising, and from afar the land looked like a dead sea, showing no sign of life. Leth knew he had been saved, but he did not feel forgiven. For faith, once mixed with fear, always leaves a scar. He did not blame God, only himself for being slow. He understood that mercy had pulled him out of the fire, but could not pull him out of the consequences of his own choices. In his eyes I read an unspoken confession that being saved is not the end, but the beginning of repentance. His daughters remained silent, growing up under the weight of that quietness, carrying in their hearts questions no one could answer. As the night deepened, I saw Leth bow his head, not praying, not weeping, only breathing like a man who carried within himself an entire city that had burned. Behind him, the land that was once Sodom still glowed red on the horizon, a warning light for every generation that justice never sleeps, and mercy never excuses a hardened heart. In the wind I heard a voice soft as breath, not to condemn, but to remind there are some who are saved, yet their souls remain in the city they left behind. Time passed, and the land where Sodom once stood had grown cold. Nothing remained but a hollow valley covered in salt and white dust. No grass grew there. No bird took flight. Only the wind moved through it, carrying the scent of the past. I looked from afar, and through the pale haze I saw other shapes appear. Other ages, other cities, yet all breathing the same air of pride. From the fields of Noah's days to the stone streets of Nineveh, and to Jerusalem beneath a blood-red sunset, history repeated itself like an unending circle. Before every judgment, there is always a warning. Before every fire, there is always a tear. In the days of Noah, men ate and drank, married and celebrated, laughing at his message. They heard the hammer strike the ark and thought it a joke. And when the first drop of rain fell, every laugh vanished into the wind. I saw faces swallowed by the waves, not because they had never heard, but because they did not believe justice would reach them. Then I saw Nineveh, the city of gold and sin, when the warning came through the reluctant lips of a weary prophet. Though Jonah did not wish it, his words still rang out, and something miraculous happened. The people bowed down, from king to servant, clothed themselves in sackcloth, covered their heads with ashes, and begged for mercy. Before that repentance, God held his hand. He did not destroy, for mercy always stands before the flame. I saw Jerusalem on its final day before the walls fell. The prophet's voice cried, "Turn back, do not harden your hearts." But the people stopped their ears, threw stones, and rejected them. When the Babylonian soldiers broke through the gates, non escapeth. Since that day, the lesson has never changed. Humanity always believes it still has time. But God is not bound by our clocks. His patience is not forgetfulness. It is the final chance. When that chance passes, every warning becomes reality. I looked farther still and saw another city, not made of stone, but of light, carrying the name of the future. In it, mankind builds towers again, this time of knowledge and ambition. They no longer worship idols of wood or stone, but themselves. They call falsehood freedom, decide wisdom, and think the mercy of God is a myth. I heard the hum of machines where prayers used to be, artificial lights hiding the star, and the hearts of men drowned in polished silence. No one speaks of Sodom anymore, yet its spirit lives on, wearing modern shapes, refined and subtle, but still the same pride and indifference. I understood then that the fire of Sodom did not fall only once in history. It falls in every generation, only in different form. Sometimes it is war, sometimes the collapse of morality, sometimes the silence of those who once knew the truth but no longer dare to speak it. God still warns, as he always has, through nature, through turmoil, through the emptiness within the human soul. And as always, he waits, for his justice is wrapped in mercy. But I have seen moments when mercy turns into silence, not because he no longer speaks, but because mankind has stopped listening. In that silence, the voice of God becomes the final judgment. For there is nothing left to say to those who have ceased to seek the light. I looked once more upon the dead land of Sodom and realized it is not merely a place of ashes, but a mirror for every generation. Whoever dares to look into it without trembling has forgotten that they too stand upon the ground of mercy, a place where fire may fall. At any moment when humanity forgets how to bow, I stood on the side of the mountain, looking down at the distant land where the richest city of the plains once stood. Now, it was only a vast sea of salt, the white earth reflecting the sun like a mirror. There was no trace of walls, no sound of voices, only waves of heat rising like the spirits of those who once laughed at the warnings. The wind carried the scent of sulfur and the bitterness of old tears. I knew I was standing before, not merely the remains of a disaster, but the testimony of God's unchanging law. Every time mankind treats grace as harmless, judgment returns, like a forgotten truth. I saw Leth kneeling at the foot of the mountain, his head bowed, his trembling hands touching the ground. He spoke no words, offered no prayer, silent as one listening to the voice of his own conscience. Behind him stood his two daughters, not looking at each other, for in their hearts Sodom still lived. They remembered the place they left, not for its sin, but for the familiarity of a lifetime. I realized that humanity's greatest sin is not in doing wrong, but in clinging to it as part of the self. As light touched Lee's face, I saw in his eyes the emptiness of a soul both saved and dying. He had escaped the fire, yet was burned by memory. In his heart, regret had turned to ash, and mercy, though near, felt as distant as the horizon. I heard a voice rise, not from heaven, but from deep within the earth, the voice of justice before the fire fell. I spoke before judgment came. I waited. That word cut through the silence like a blade. I understood that God never acts without warning. Fire does not fall by chance. It is the outcome of countless ignored chances, mocked warnings, and scorned mercy. Every fallen civilization begins with the same phrase. It will not happen to us. But that confidence is always the first step toward the abyss. As I looked down, smoke still rose in thin streams, mixing with sunlight, light as mist, yet heavy with death. It was the last breath of a world that once believed itself untouchable. Among the ashes, I saw a fragment of wall, and on it faint carvings in an ancient tongue. Nearly erased by time, I could not read it all. But one phrase remained clear: glory belongs to us. I closed my eyes, for I knew that self-exaltation is the beginning of destruction. No city can stand when man places himself at the center instead of God. When I opened my eyes, the sun had risen high. Its light shone upon the salt plain below, gleaming as though Sodom still burned in its own reflection. I knew then that the justice of God is never only punishment, but a reminder that grace is not the right to live as we please. But the chance to return, I turned away from the mountain, and in the silence I seemed to hear the voice of history still echoing. Those who do not learn from Sodom will repeat its fate. Leth walked behind me, his figure growing smaller in the dry light. Above us, the first birds crossed the sky, silent as unspoken prayers. And I knew, though judgment had passed, mercy had not left the world. For even on this dead land, the light still reflected, bearing witness that the justice and mercy of God can never be separated. I stood upon the mountain peak, where the wind moved through cold stones and the sunset fell like the final curtain of a sacred tragedy. Below me, the land of Sodom still shimmered faintly, like a wound that had not yet closed. From that place came no cries. No rising ash, only silence. A sacred silence, where justice had spoken its final word and mercy still lingered in its echo. I understood then that this story was not only about a lost city, but a mirror of the human soul. Each of us carries a Sodom within, a place once prosperous, once loved, but now decayed by pride, indifference, and the fear of letting go. I once believed judgment was an ending, but now I know it is a cleansing. God does not destroy to end, He destroys to begin again. In the ashes, I saw the seed of faith, a small, untouched sprout still alive beneath the dust of time. It is from ruin that the human heart learns to bow, to listen, to understand that light is not far away, but within, where the soul once burned and now is reborn. I thought of Leth, of his eyes gazing upon the land below, no longer with regret, but with understanding. He had come to see that salvation is not exemption, but a calling back to truth. I looked toward the setting sun, and in its crimson glow I saw what I had never grasped before, that the judgment of God is always wrapped in love. For if He did not love, He would not have waited. If He did not pity, He would not have sent His messengers. If He did not hope, He would not have drawn the hands of men out of the fire. I listened to the wind across the valley, and it seemed to whisper, I remember this, all glory apart from God turns to ash, but every soul that kneels will rise again from the ashes. In that moment, my heart was at peace, free from fear, free from anger, filled only with gratitude, for I understood that both justice and mercy flow from the same source, the love of the Creator, and in this world full of noise, the holiest thing remains the silence that listens. I closed my eyes, letting the breath of wind touch my face, and I pray that each person, as they walk through the ashes of their own life, may find light again in that quiet. May peace fill your soul, and may the word of God you have heard today walk with you through every step ahead. I pray that you find light in silence, strength in faith, and rest in His presence May your home be filled with peace, of your heart with courage, and your spirit with the quiet faith that you are never alone. When you close this video, remember one thing: God is still beside you in every moment, in every breath, until we meet again. Be strong, be gentle, and stay close to His grace